among us.
Hello spirits, so Mystery Incorporated, we all know what that show is by now, right? Considering it's compared to another show regularly and doing it better 13 years ago. Even shows that take direct inspiration from, well, shit shows are being talked about in a better light. Also, yes, I have heard it's good, but I don't exactly want to watch it. Don't make a good show with an ugly art style. It's not exactly inspiring engagement. But back then, some exciting news was revealed, an animated adult show with a darker take on the Scooby-Doo franchise. And what could go wrong? Mystery Incorporated had dark themes and this show will get to show them visually. Well, it was revealed Scooby-Doo wouldn't be in the show. Well, that's unique. It's fine. The show can sustain itself without Scooby.
A serial killer calling from inside my house? Yes, that's a classic, and that's my point. Why change anything when the classics all still work, right? Wait, you're inside my house!
Okay, maybe not. Well, that was just a teaser. The show won't. Yikes. Velma definitely gave Mindy an accomplishment, alright? You now have the lowest rated animated show on IMDb, so great job, Brown Star! Though I have seen others say it's not deserving a 1.3, but to me it deserves that score because it tries to be so many things. Insufferable characters like from The Prince, let's do it. Meta humor straight from the tit of Rick and Morty, yep. Incorporated new lingo from the modern era like Family Guy? Oh, you know we have to be hit with the kids. How about making fun of the size of someone's dick? Always a fucking classic. But then you have Mystery Incorporated, a show that looks like it's for kids, and instead is a thrilling, interesting, captivating show with a darker premise. Just like what Velma tries to do. Tries. Because you'll see as I point out the many flaws in the show. Even funny facts that just show how lazy the writers truly are. Anyways, let's go through both shows without further ado. Mystery Incorporated follows 4 humans and their animal mascot, Fred Jones, Daphne Blake, Velma Dinkley, Norville, Shaggy Rogers, and Scooby-Doo. Also, to those who don't know, Norville is an established name in the Scooby-Doo franchise. This is not new.
Norville, I really appreciate you driving me to the plastic surgeon's office.
As they solve the mystery in and out of their residential home, Crystal Cove, a place best known for its curse to be haunted, all while a darker mystery from the past returns. And Velma follows Velma and the backstory to how the game became friends, while Velma tries to solve a mystery about a murderer removing teenagers' brains, and find a connection to her missing mother. Mystery Incorporated is one of those few shows I can say, hey, I know this. Kids WB used to play this every now and then. But I really did not realize everything that was being shown at the time. The character development for characters, their relationships, the darker tone Season 2 would leave, and just how truly evil some characters really were. 999! It's a show I will keep close to my heart, as it strikes as a show for kids and giving the adults something to watch as well. However, for Velma, unlike the few adult shows I could consider nostalgic, wouldn't inspire anything but hatred and just disgust. Because I do believe this show was as bad as the scores today. It's the textbook definition of what's wrong with adult animation. Well, not every aspect, but we'll cross that bridge in a second. But first, the animation or the style of Mystery Incorporated. Well, I really love the general look of it. Now, Mystery Incorporated's style is reminiscent of the original, but makes it his own. Especially incorporating a lot of CGI I had and hadn't noticed. When they did use CGI for certain things, it can blend well into the scene, such as the mystery van when it's driving around. But sometimes it was obvious it wasn't hand-drawn, and even I noticed this as a kid. I just didn't know the name for it. The cicada antagonist having obvious CGI when combined, the horrible herd when they're doing their run cycle, or even the second last episode having the CGI monster and a couple CGI backgrounds that just don't blend well. And it was to obviously save some money and to make it easier on the animators, but that's saying sometimes it does feel limited with its stiff animation. Now the animation does still move fluently, the lighting, the shading, it's all great, but in moments like these, it feels like the voice cast weren't animated as they should be.
Booyah! Who wants to judge me now, huh? Who?
You wanna judge me? You? In your face. Yeah!
But that doesn't bring down the visuals of the show as a whole alone. Especially the show's intro, the backgrounds whether in Crystal Cove or outdoor locations, the character designs for every character, whether it's the one-off masked characters or the townsfolk with recognizable designs. And personalities of course, but that's for later. And it's the same for the location as well, and making sure to establish locations frequently used. The Crystal Cove Mines, the school, or the mayor's office, and that's what Mystery Incorporated makes up with, its unique designs and locations. Now the animation style is bare bones good. It's an improvement over the last few clones, but it's seriously one of the few positives in the show, but even then, it's not perfect. I think the shading, lighting, and even the hallucinations are beautiful. Since it's bright, it's fluent, it shows how serious it is, until they cut to her as a joke. And that's where that ends, because there are friends that just look yuck. And sometimes they get the characters full on shading and lighting for dramatic effect, and it sometimes suits, sometimes it doesn't. Because they at times felt like they were trying to do some anime shit and add in halftones to some of the animation, which felt like an odd choice, but that's really all I can say. They don't try anything new, only showing the excessive gore that apparently is the norm for adult shows, but I'll talk about that much later. In Mystery Incorporated, I believe the characters were pretty unique takes. Fred is a trap-loving guy who struggles to express his feelings.
I'm not a guy anymore.
What?
Daphne is the rich girl crushing on Fred, but acts far different than her family. Velma is the smart girl questioning her sexuality, and Shaggy and Scooby over the series begin to become more courageous, which is better shown in the finale of season 2. But an issue I've seen talked about was Shaggy and Velma. While I myself don't shit them personally, their relationship on both ends was not meant to be, as in Shaggy wasn't fully committed to the relationship, and Velma was trying to change things about Shaggy. And if lesbian representation had been allowed, I think the friendship between Velma and Marcy would have been more developed on.
That's my girl.
Since it does just leave the viewer not liking the relationship and loathing the show as a whole. But to move along from it, I believe the better relationship development is between Fred and Daphne. It's shown through the series that Fred didn't know how to express his feelings to Daphne, and when she was hinting it, he took no notice. But through the series, he has those moments, but if Daphne was gone or kidnapped, he would freak out over her. And finally, during the last couple episodes, he ends that arc. And there's more I could go over. There's also the many different characters in Crystal Cove. Mayor Jones, Janet, Sheriff Stone, the original Mystery Incorporated, the parents of each character, and so much more. There's also other side characters that appear sometimes, but each have their own set of quirks and arcs. Mayor Jones, for example, is shown to be a cold to his son, or there were a few moments that show that he does love him, and moments that when looked through season 2 eyes are more meaningful. He still would have put Fred's safety in jeopardy, but somewhere in the series we understood that the mayor always loved Fred, or the quirky sheriff that I find is a better Joe Swanson. But that's enough of that, so you'll watch the show yourself. But Velma's cast of characters, in a town with the same name, is unbearable. There aren't any good characters within the show's boundaries, but what about the gang themselves? Fred is a rich kid that doesn't know how to do anything for himself, and over time begins liking women for their minds. Literally. Daphne is a drug-dealing teen and over time changes with Velma's company. Velma hates everyone and everything and tries solving her mother's mystery. Shaggy is a food reviewer who simps over Velma. I noticed they kept calling Norville Shaggy. I apologize for this. And Scooby-Doo technically doesn't exist. Who he's instead replaced with is obviously Gigi, who is just high school hot girl. And to talk about that for a moment now, Gigi is and was a clear replacement to Scooby-Doo. It's mainly the clothing choice, the colour of her clothing, not the clothing choice. And that, remember in Mystery Incorporated, when Velma gave Shaggy a choice between his best friend or girlfriend? Well, Shaggy loves Gigi and Velma, and end up simping for Velma regardless, with then Gigi getting the boot after episode 8. But in terms of relationships, the main quote-unquote good one is Velma and Daphne's. Now, I doubt the lesbian community is accepting this shift, but I don't speak for them, so who knows. But the show tries to throw representation our way, but they also had the relationship take weird paths. There's Velma and Daphne's friendship and relationship, and then there's Norville and Velma's friendship and simpship, and Velma liking Fred, then not liking him, but Fred ends up liking Velma, and Daphne and Fred get back together to be popular again. So it really sounds like Mindy has been wanting every character to be dating when she was a kid. Then there are the few main townsfolk. There's the pedophilic mayor, the shitty sheriff, and the stereotypical lesbian cops. And other characters that are unlikable or just hateable as some South Park characters. But I really could not give a shit about any of them, so Mystery Incorporated's story was amazingly crafted. During its first season, it eased into the main mystery, leaving bits and bops of it all over and even revealing major parts of the story. But throughout season 1, it takes an episodic approach, but sprinkles parts of the overarching mystery, which makes it somewhat familiar to the old cartoons, such as introducing us to who the characters are, their interests, personalities, struggles, what's Mr. E's part to play in all this, what did Pericles do, and just so much more. But Season 2 takes up every plot point it's set up and dedicates most of its episodes to this, and even develops the characters as I mentioned before. I honestly would have loved a conclusion with Season 3, but it would have felt like a completely different show with a different story. And then there's the story in Velma, the only quote-unquote good part about the show besides the animation. Now, there are a few overarching mysteries in the show. Around, seems there are only 3. Velma's mum, the murderer, and Daphne's parents. And unlike the abundance of characters I listed that weren't interesting in the slightest, the characters surrounding them don't have mysteries or connections to other characters that are interesting to know. I actually just remembered there's also the principal who's related to like the main lady, and Norville's father, he's connected to her as well. This show sucks. The mystery around Daphne's parents is, well, boring. She finds out her birth parents are alive but end up being criminals, where they don't love her and end up using her to try and get away with crystals. And then her adoptive parents, to her, they love her. Now, can you tell me why that sounds familiar? Well, buddy oh pal, it's because it's the same plot from Mystery Incorporated. Because I jokingly said in a server that, oh, to find the parents' plotline, haha, just like Mystery Incorporated. And then as each episode came out, it just kept looking like the same thing. And then the description of it is summed up in a tweet I made. And it's not like they happened to accidentally do it point by point. You had to have actually watched the show to get every detail right. The only difference being Daphne was left behind. Fred was used as leverage. But even then, they didn't care about him. And the mystery towards Velma's mum was still pretty boring. It had a few leads, sure, but it was pretty shit still. And the last mystery, being the murderer, was the only entertaining part. But even then it's bare boned with how it's presented. You're given small and subtle clues, but not enough to give you an indication on who. And at the end, I'll reveal who it was. The Dark Fiend in Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated is one of the most bewildering things to me, because I will be comparing a very, and I mean very dark scene in the show. But the show, as I mentioned, tucked upon dark subjects that, for a kid's show, is very surprising. You have Fred being kidnapped as a kid, an entire mystery revolving around an evil sarcophagus, people's good parts of them being just lost forever, Mystery E having a mutated thing in his back that injects venom, just the thought of what happened to the horrible herd, and just so much more. And it's one of the few things that interested me through my rewatch of the show. I never felt bored in the canon episodes. Each episode had an interesting villain, sometimes it had a darker story to it, because it appealed to a wider audience, which presented dark moments or imagery, or like take the theater episode for example. It looks like an episode that touches upon the history of Crystal Cove, but in a fun, goofy way, but later discovers the original ghost warns them that Scooby-Doo will betray them because the donkey did the same. But it's stuff like that that makes a kid show with dark elements actually good. But let's talk about the dark element in Velma, or should I talk about the gore? Because it's sadder than people crying over Mr. Beast doing something good for the world. Because the general theme in adult shows is, hey, no restrictions! And I'm not saying that sort of aspect can't work, because it does for a lot of shows. Hell of a Boss's main formula has demons from hell killing targets. Primal is in a prehistoric world and having to kill to survive. The Venture Brothers is in a superhero society where some are licensed to kill. All of those shows work best with gore because none are underage teenagers sometimes. Because Velma shoehorns so much gore to the point where no one bats an eye or even fucking cares. And I mean this in and out of universe. And to use the comparison from Mystery Incorporated, they you know what? Roll the clip.
Come on, Scooby. We have to keep going.
Tell me, Mindy, where was that? Where was that emotion once in any episode you wrote or voiced in? Where was that tension? There wasn't a drop of blood shown, and yet that alone was more heart-aching than anything that they ran us over with. Oh, this kid's got his legs cut off? Who cares? Also, I just wanted to say, but Al Yankovic actually voices this character, and is the only character to get harmed in that matter twice. I feel like someone on the team wasn't a fan of Weird Al. What about the Brenda teenage girls? Who remembers that plot with other stuff going on? This was written before episode 6. It's just the gore doesn't fit in a world with a teenage version of the game. If they were aged up to a college student, it would have made a lot more sense, but Mindy decides to allow sexualization to its characters, and worse. Also, yes, before I get a comment about this, yes, definitely had a few outfits in Mystery Incorporated, but at least she was clothed. But let's move on from this. How can I explain Mystery Incorporated's humor? Well, it's good. Like, they have some really good writers on their team. Kofi. How the jokes are written is that they point out the cartoony aspects of something.
Like, where does she keep getting these weapons? That outfit has no pockets!
Say a line flat and it ends up being funny.
But you've got a job as a teacher. Why do you need more money?
Yeah, my bad.
I'm really getting ripped off.
Because the show doesn't rely on one gag in an episode to make you laugh.
Would you arrest her if someone like me said someone like her was bothering him?
Well, yeah, that would do it.
And when they do add a gag into the show, it's repeated through episodes, and most of the time it's for development reasons. Or it sometimes just ends up actually being funny.
Who the heck can that be?
Oh, such sights.
Weirdo.
But of course, not every joke is going to land in the show. But there aren't many that I can remember on my rewatch that made me cringe. And it really just shows that the writers were competent, and if it were made in this era of bad comedians, we'd get... oh no. So Velma's humor. Now, this clearly takes inspiration from a show that ran its course 4 seasons ago, because the meta humor in that show is getting very tired out, and it's even worse here, alongside other elements, but other videos exist for that. The times meta humor pops up is generally when a character will make a statement and then Velma goes all negative.
Fred? That's huge! Though not you might be gay huge.
Okay, stop. In this day and age, you can't speculate about someone's sexuality unless they're famous or Peppermint Patty.
As to talk about the outside world or self-reference themselves.
So, what are we selling?
Oh, just the usual. Zoinks, Jeepers, Mystery Machine, and of course, ganja.
Drugs. They're talking about drugs.
Jinkies!
Okay, now you're totally trying to make it a thing.
An old-timey photo booth. We can disguise ourselves.
Daphne, that's stupid. It will take at least 5 minutes to change. Who would ever stop to put on a costume in the middle of a chase?
And this same trait can be said about other characters as well.
This wasn't an exercise in deprogramming, it's an exercise in slut-shaming.
And this aspect of character reminds me of James from Oddballs, where he'll go on a rant and she does that almost every fucking time. Whether it's about women getting male gazes, to saying the amount of sex and nudity in the pilot compared to the rest of the series. And I can tell you now, only a few idiots find 2020 meta humor funny. It honestly feels like one of the cases for the 9 Realms. It feels like there's a joke, but I can barely tell when they're being told. And when it's obvious, it's either disgusting,
I can't believe I let you drink from my jar,
misunderstandings,
Have to be Fog King.
Excuse me? Wait, you said Fog King, not
Cringe-inducing.
Man, if I ever even think about getting into 420 culture, or especially 420 related humor, kill me. You know what 420 is, right?
Yeah, it's code for adults who still watch cartoons.
Or it crushes the tension in a fucking scene. Let me talk about the overarching joke of the show, Fred liking the brains of women and not bodies. But Velma decides to take it so far that it's disgusting to think about. Fred decides that he's attracted to the brains of girls, and I mean that literally. I think he's a sapiophile, which is someone attracted to someone's intelligence. But these girls aren't smart, and they decide, hey, why not make Fred drink the goo from their capsules? And buckle up, it gets worse. Because they actually hook up with all 3 brains. And I just want to end this, so let's end it with what the seasons had built up to their finales. As I mentioned for the story part, Mystery Incorporated had bits and pieces of a bigger story in Season 1, while Season 2 would focus a majority of its runtime on everything that it had set up, with the disc pieces or the main antagonist, the evil entity that is locked away in a sarcophagus, whereas we learn about the event Nibiru that will help set him free. We learn that they are his creations who were made to set him free. And while we as an audience notice, the characters don't know until near the end. So during the last few episodes, the gang is told by the entity and questions if they are truly friends. But after it's set free, how it's defeated is through believing in one another, that they weren't his creations, and while some aspects of its finale aren't perfect either, it had a firm grip on what its antagonist was. Velma, on the other hand, had 10 episodes and leaves little to no imagination for its villain. We know that it's a murderer trying to recreate someone's work, but in the finale, it's a twist reveal, and not a good one at that. It wasn't Clancy, and I actually did think it was him, considering Mr. Incorporated in Season 1 also built that the Mayor Jones was evil, and it's the same voice actor. It wasn't Fred's dad or Velma's mum, but it said it's Fred's mum. Well, isn't that something? Now I can see why they decided to do this, but that's not saying it's good. They explain it in the episode, but like, it should have been Velma's mum. Would it have been obvious? Very, but it makes far more sense. She was a mess with Velma, and having the brain of a better kid in Velma's body would have made her tolerable. The journals were borrowed by Dia, and the brains never knew who was under the mask. But no, it's Fred's mum because they decided to include, and this wasn't ever mentioned once during 9 episodes, fucking hypnotism. So hypnotism actually was used, but it was brought up once in episode 6, and oh yeah, that was it. That Velma's mum was hypnotized into thinking she was the murderer, and causing Velma's hallucinations to start. Way to subvert our expectation, guys. Disney has done better twist villains, and that's not saying much. Velma, Mystery Incorporated, 2 different shows meant for 2 different audiences, with 2 different animation styles, 2 different styles of humor, storytelling, characterization, and one having the advantage of being made into the new era of animation. And yet the show is hated for almost everything I just discussed, while the show made a decade before had been praised for doing it right. Velma is the pinnacle definition of what's wrong with adult animation. It tries to be so many things, copies so many aspects that made a bad show bad or made it good. The show has left a distaste in my mouth that I have not seen since the 9 Realms, and while I will praise this year for the animation coming out this year, Spider-Verse, Super Mario movie, Wish, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, Hazbin Hotel, and many more films and television shows to come out, it's unfortunate there are still studios who don't accept this new era. And even then, we're not sure if some of the media I mentioned will be as good as The Last Wish. But I think I should be wrapping it up. If I could recommend a piece of advice, watch Mystery Incorporated and skip Velma. It offers nothing new, and you'd have a better chance liking Mystery Incorporated a lot more. Unless you like watching shit shows.